Albert Einstein, Richard Feynman,
They had invented
Benjamin Franklin. I've been studying for years people who are the most self-educated geniuses of all time. I actually read a biography literally every week. That's like my whole thing. But anyway, through studying hundreds of these people, there are certain habits that begin to emerge, certain patterns that you begin to recognize in book after book after book. This habit that we're about to go over today is one that you've probably already heard about, but almost no one seems to use it. And if people actually did use it, then there would be way more geniuses walking around the earth. So if you're someone who is constantly studying, constantly reading, constantly learning, but never seem to be keeping up with the people around you, then this is definitely for you, especially if you tend to learn something and then forget it a week or a month later. And if you watch this video all the way through, then this will never happen to you again, because every genius understood something very important. That every bit of knowledge, it doesn't matter whether it's in the STEM field or in the arts field, it's important and it can be used as long as you're able to remember it and understand it. And that's like the main problem, right? That you're not able to remember what you learn. And that's what this habit aims to fix. And that leads me to the first point of this video, which is the differences between self-taught geniuses and everyone else. The difference between a self-taught genius and everyone else is non-intelligence. It's not what school they went to, where they were born, how many books their parents read to them as a kid, but it's actually about how they treat what they learn. You see, regular people tend to treat knowledge sort of like it's a stamp collection. They'll say things like, oh, I watched that video, or oh, I took that course, or oh, I read that book. But when you ask them to tell you about the stamps and the dates on the stamps and what each stamp means, a lot of them will really struggle with that. Aside from like the genuine stamp collectors, a lot of people collect stamps just to collect stamps. Or in the way we're talking about it, a lot of people collect knowledge just to collect knowledge. The real difference between self-educated geniuses and everyone else is that when self-educated geniuses learn something, they don't just learn it and move on, but they learn it and they take the time to reflect on it and to consume it and to compress it. And that's the key word here. The geniuses compress while everyone else collects. And that's something that you'll find repeating over and over again throughout history. Benjamin Franklin had this whole thing where before he told anyone else about a new idea that he had, he would write it down first. This was to make sure that he actually took the time to reflect and actually understand the concept that he was talking about. And he even went to the extreme sometimes. Sometimes he would take these papers and then he would just translate whatever he wrote down in English, translate it into French, and then translate it back to English just to make sure he truly understood what he was talking about. Malcolm X in his autobiography talks about his time in prison, and he said he copied down an entire dictionary, not just to pass the time or to know all the words, but to actually understand the words and what they mean and the concepts behind them. Abraham Lincoln, literally the exact same thing. He didn't have a real education, he grew up poor, but he was constantly learning. And he said, "When I'm preparing to speak, I spend 2/3 of my time thinking about what they want to hear, and 1/3 about making it absolutely clear." That's the real difference between these geniuses and everyone else. The geniuses don't just consume as much information as possible. That's pretty much a given in the top 10%, but they take the time to actually ingrain the concepts in their minds. A good analogy for this is that you can think of two people eating. You can think of the first type of person just swallowing as much food as they possibly can, not really chewing and hoping that it will just magically digest. But everyone who knows how to properly eat knows that they need to chew the food first and then swallow it and then give their body time to digest it and process it. It's the exact same concept for learning. It doesn't matter what you actually learn if you're not able to use it. Just like with food, it doesn't matter what you eat if you're not able to process it. This is actually one of the largest failures of the school system, where in school, although you have the luxury of having a formal education, it's structured in a way to where if you want to do the minimum possible to just get through it, then what you can do is not really pay attention to any of the concepts, but just pick out a few key things here and there and then cram for the test the night of it. Writing papers or essays is actually a much healthier way of testing kids and making sure that they actually understand the concepts. But unfortunately, not many people are doing much of that either, at least anymore. And so one of the main reasons why these self-taught people do so well in history is because there's no teacher handing them quizzes. There's not really a structure there for them to learn. So they have to create their own structure, and they create a structure that actually allows them to learn and understand the concepts that they're learning, because otherwise there would be no point. Even people like Einstein and Oppenheimer, who actually did have a formal education, still created systems outside of their education just to really understand the concepts deeper. Einstein being known for forming study groups with his friends, and Oppenheimer being the one who actually brought quantum mechanics to America. Every single genius has a point where they realize that they can't just consume knowledge and forget 90% of it, but they actually need a way to actually remember it. Most people do forget 90% of what they learn simply because they're learning passively and they have no systems in place to actually remember it. And that should definitely scare you, because if you don't have any clear systems in place, then you're probably part of most people. So what is this one habit, this one pattern, this one trick that every great person in history has used? And like I said earlier in the video, a lot of you have probably heard of it, and it's very simple, but we're going to go deep into it and do a deep dive into how it really works and how you should actually apply it in your life. And it's called the Feynman Technique. First, let's talk about Richard Feynman, though, because, I mean, I read this whole book on him. It's literally called Genius, and if you're looking to be one of the greats or a genius or, you know, one of the greats, I already said that. If you're looking to be someone amazing, this book is a must read. It's so good, and he really was one of the greatest scientists of all time. Like, if you wanted to make a list of the greatest scientists ever, Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Richard Feynman. He won the Nobel Prize in physics, he helped to develop the atom bomb at Los Alamos, and he pretty much made the field of quantum electrodynamics into what it is today. And as a physics major, let me just tell you that that is a big deal. But I think the thing that really stands out above all of these accomplishments is actually shown in his nickname. People called him the Great Explainer, and it's for a reason, because he didn't just know a lot of things, but he was able to explain them so deeply, so well in a story-like manner where everyone could understand them. I mean, if you've ever heard this guy speak, you will know exactly what I mean, and I especially recommend the 6 Easy Pieces. It's just 6 lectures that explain the basis of physics in the modern world. But if you listen to these lectures, or pretty much any lecture that he gives, you can see how magnificent he is at making these extremely complicated topics just very simple and down to earth. There's this quote from him that I love that goes, "I learned the very difference between knowing the name of something and actually knowing something." And this quote to me just shows the essence of Feynman. He wasn't someone who just learned something just to learn something, but when he went to go learn something, he learned it in its entirety. When he was a kid, he actually had this streak and habit to take things apart and then put them back together just to understand how, like, the inside of the mechanics of things works. Thomas Edison had a very similar trait. He actually almost blew up his basement when he was 12, and there's tons and tons of examples from history for this. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci with his sketches, Steve Wozniak with calculators, Henry Ford with watches, Elon with video games. All of the greats of history just have an absolute clear obsession to understand how things work, how the mechanics and how the inside of things actually worked. And it shows that they don't just want knowledge to have knowledge to show off to the world, but they want knowledge to actually understand how the world works. Feynman was the exact same way, and for his whole life, he had this habit where every time he learned something new, he would make himself teach the concept back to himself just to make sure that he fully understood it, and if he couldn't do that, then he knew that he didn't fully understand the concept, and so he would go back and study more. And this doesn't just work in physics, but it works in any field that you need to understand concepts for, which is every field. With this mindset, Feynman taught himself to draw, he taught himself how to play the bongos, how to crack safes, how to tell good jokes, how to learn new languages, even how to pick up girls using psychology. So from this list, you can tell 2 things. 1, that he was a very eccentric guy, and 2, that he learned by teaching. He taught himself how to learn things by teaching. A little bit paradoxical, but that's how it works. There's even the story of when he took a vacation to Brazil and he was learning Portuguese, and he made himself give actual physics lectures in Portuguese so that he could make sure that he didn't just understand the language, but he also understood the concepts that he was talking about. Feynman was a genius not because he memorized more things than everyone else or because he knew more than everyone else, but because he understood more than everyone else. And it was the Feynman technique, this habit that used over and over again, that allowed him to get there. So although everyone has probably heard of it, almost no one uses it, right? Otherwise we would have a bunch of Feynmans walking around, right? So we're going to do a deep dive on this to actually understand how it works, why it works, and how you can apply it in your own life. The Feynman technique can be broken down into 4 parts. 1, write down concept. 2, teach it simply. 3, find gaps. 4, close the gaps. If you just repeat these steps over and over again for everything that you learn, I'm telling you that you will never forget what you learn ever again, not just because you're actually understanding the concept, but also because you're constantly teaching these things to yourself. So you're constantly not just teaching the information to others, but you're also teaching it to yourself. So let's start with the first thing, which is choosing a concept and writing it down. So this is a really easy part because all you have to do is choose a concept that you like and that you want to learn more about, and then write it down on a piece of paper and try to explain it to yourself. So as an example, we are going to use gravity. Let's say you want to know everything about gravity. So we're going to write down gravity at the top, and maybe that it's one of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe. It's what makes mass pull on other mass. And maybe we know the gravity equation, which is force of gravity equals big G, which is the gravitational constant, times mass 1 times mass 2 over distance squared. So right there, that's a pretty good description of gravity, but the important thing is to write it down because you need to actually see what you know, and you need to actually see so that it actually feels like you're teaching it to yourself. People like Isaac Newton and Leonardo da Vinci are especially known for this step. Leonardo would sit outside for hours and just watch the birds, studying their movements and their shape, and then would just fill notebook after notebook, writing down every single thing that he noticed about them to truly understand them. Isaac Newton, same thing. Obviously, the story about the apple falling on his head probably isn't true, but it's based on something, and that something is the studying of forces in the universe and writing it down. One of his most famous writings is this phrase that goes, hypotheses non fingo, which translates to, I frame no hypotheses, only facts. Step 2 is to actually teach what you wrote down now. This is by far the easiest and probably the most progressed stage of the Feynman technique, simply because it's so easy to do nowadays. In the past, you would have to go to social groups like Einstein or teach in bars like Niels Bohr, but in the modern day, you can literally just grab your phone, record yourself teaching a lecture, put it on YouTube, and you will start gaining feedback. So let's say that now you're making a video on gravity, and you're making a video and you say something like, when I drop this pen, it falls to the ground. This is because the earth pulls on the pen and the pen pulls on the earth. So then you can plug in the numbers in the equation, the mass of the pen, the mass of the earth. And at the same time that you're teaching all this, you're ingraining the information in your head as well. And everything's going good so far. You're teaching, they're learning, you're learning, until that one comment pops up. That one comment that points out the hole in your argument. Why does space allow the pen to fall to the earth? And this is step 3. Identify the gaps. Eventually, as you're teaching the information, people will start to ask more and more questions, and you're going to be able to go deeper and deeper into the subjects until one of 2 things happens. The first is that someone asks something that you can't explain, and the second is that someone asks something that no one can explain. This is the most exciting part in my opinion because it shows the edge of your understanding of a topic. It's a gap, and you should even feel like a little bit of pain from the uncertainty of not knowing something, from hitting the limits of your own understanding. And that's actually a good thing because you actually just located what you don't know, and you can start filling in the gaps. And that's step 4. Fill in the gaps. So maybe you go back to studying and you look into Einstein and what Einstein's thought on space were and the Einstein equations. And suddenly you find out that Einstein talked about a thing called space-time, and that gravity isn't actually real, but it's simply mass warping the space around it. The bending of space creates a path, and smaller things in terms of mass follow that path. That's why the pen falls, that's why the apples fall, that's why the Earth's orbit. And so as you're teaching yourself, you're filling in that gap, but you also open new gaps. Suddenly you're learning about all these new equations and manifold diagrams and tensors that you have to use for those, and you can explore these topics using the Feynman technique and repeating the cycle over and over again. This is the formula and the habit that every great person in history has used over and over and over again. They learn something, they write it down, they teach it, they find the gaps, and then they refine it. And this is how the information stays fresh in their minds because they're constantly teaching it, they're constantly relearning it, they're constantly refining it, making it better and better, understanding more and more. It's really quite beautiful. And every concept just builds on top of each other. Your understanding of the universe just grows bigger and bigger. That's what happened to Newton and Franklin and Einstein and Feynman. And it's honestly a really simple formula, right? So far we're so good. It's 4 steps. It's really easy. It's not hard. But now we're going to talk about why people don't actually use this method. Because if it's so easy, then we should have many more geniuses just walking around the earth. But it's a bit more complicated than that. It all comes down to step number 3. And the reason we have to go back to step number 3 is because finding the gaps in what you don't know is actually an incredibly painful thing to do. And there's actually a very easy way to explain this using Darwinian theory, right? Where the strongest survive and the ones who don't adapt die. In an ecosystem, every organism is faced with different challenges and it has to adapt, otherwise it will die. You can think of your mind as a very similar thing, except instead of organisms, it's ideas. And so when you discover a gap in your knowledge, it's actually very painful because in order for a new idea to take root in your mind, an old idea has to die. The bigger the idea, the more it's going to hurt and the more it's going to change your life. And some might even throw you into an existential depression. Trust me, I've been there. And this phenomena, this pain that you feel, is something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the reason for why when most people hit step 3, they won't push past the pain. They won't look into new ways to understand things, and so they'll just stay stagnant. These people will grasp at straws. They'll believe anything just to keep their old idea alive. And this happens to great people too. This isn't just like something that doesn't happen to everyone. When Albert Einstein was confronted with quantum mechanics, he continued to hold on to the idea that a particle can't be described as a probability, even though it was practically proven at the time. And he got into many arguments with Niels Bohr and the rest of the physics community because of this disagreement. This pain that you're going to feel though is actually a good thing, because as hard as it is a thing to overcome, it's also that barrier to entry that's going to allow you to sort of outsmart the people around you and sort of shine. In the end, it's going to be what helps you move ahead of everyone else. If this process was easy, like I keep saying throughout the entire video, then there would be a million Feynmans and geniuses just walking around, and we'd probably be a type 3 civilization harnessing the power of the sun and whatnot. Instead, we're not doing that, and instead, we have people walking around with the illusion of intelligence rather than the intelligence itself. It's so weird because a lot of what we call progress today is really just fighting the human nature that we all contend with. And if we can push past the cognitive dissonance, the pain of learning and allowing new ideas to grow in our minds, then in a way that is actually real progress, even though it's embarrassing at times. And there's a lot of historical examples to prove this. The first guy that comes to mind isn't even a scientific genius or anything, but he was just a relentless learner, and that was Napoleon. Dang it. I was trying to go one video without mentioning Napoleon. I guess it's not possible. Anyway, Napoleon in his early days was literally known for going into meetings and asking very simple questions. One of his officers even saying he began questioning him about a host of facts. Some of his questions showed such a complete ignorance of the most ordinary things that several of my comrades smiled. The answers were caught up and often found to resolve into other questions, which he deduced in consequence from them. Like, it's actually weird, kind of funny to think about the greatest military leader of all time getting laughed at by his own soldiers for asking stupid questions. But that's kind of the whole point, because afterwards, after going through the pain and the embarrassment of not knowing something, of asking these questions, he was then able to build upon those questions, and he was able to acquire the knowledge needed to execute the task that was needed. And that's how he was able to become the greatest military leader ever. I'm a Napoleon Glazer, alright? Leave me alone. The point is that he used the Feynman technique to understand the very nature and the very simple basics of everything that his army was doing. A more modern example of the exact same concept is Elon Musk and what he did at SpaceX. SpaceX was the first ever non-country entity that successfully launched a rocket into orbit, and after this they continued to expand and launch even more rockets every year. And one of the ways that they did this was by Elon using the Feynman technique. This is actually a very specific niche of the Feynman technique called the idiot complex. What he did was he went back to the very basics and he asked, what are the raw components of this rocket actually worth? No production costs and none of that, just the basic raw materials needed to produce this rocket. And you end up getting a ratio called the idiot index, which is the total cost of a product, in this case a rocket, divided by the raw materials used to make the product. By simply putting it all into a spreadsheet, Elon was able to start SpaceX down a path that would end up with them making a rocket way cheaper. The price of one of their rockets went from 50 million to 2 million. And this was simply because he went back to the basics, he found the gaps, he closed the gaps, and he was able to make rockets way faster. I'm going to give you 2 more examples of people using the Feynman technique, and then we're going to get into how to incorporate the Feynman technique into your own life and how to actually use it. This is actually a very powerful one. Socrates was an ancient philosopher and teacher, but the way he taught was very different than how most people taught at the time. His way of teaching consisted very largely in having a student go up and present an argument or read an essay or stuff like that. And then afterwards, he would do anything. He would ask questions to poke holes in their arguments. And you see where I'm going with this. This is exactly to find out where the gaps are. After this, the students could go and fill in the gaps. But the point is that he was poking holes in their arguments to show them that they didn't understand their concepts as well as they could have. Socrates even had this quote that goes, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." And in a way, it was like saying that you can always know the subject better. There are always going to be more gaps to fill, and that's why repeating the process over and over again is the whole point. And finally, the final example that I have is pretty much a field of math that was invented and can explain the whole world that was found using the Feynman technique. You see, when Newton started explaining gravity to others, he very quickly found that there were gaps in what he was teaching. These gaps were in large part because the mathematical tools that they used back then didn't make sense when he tried to explain his new concepts. And so he had to invent this whole new type of math called calculus. In his book, Principia, by the way, writing a book is the past equivalent of making a YouTube video or teaching an online lecture or stuff like that. But in his book, you can tell very clearly that he's looking for gaps. His explanations were very clear and they were very rational and logical and very step-by-step arguments towards how he got to think what he thought. And this technique was how he was able to accomplish so much. So you probably get the point with historical examples, but how can you actually apply the Feynman technique and use it to maximize the effect in the 21st century? So the benefit of using the Feynman technique right now rather than in the past, not that you could use it in the past, but just saying, the benefit is that information moves 100 times faster, maybe even 1,000 times faster right now than it did. And so creating the feedback loops to teach and find the gaps is going to be way easier and faster. The method that I like to use is by building something that I like to call a mental fortress. Like literally imagine the field that you're in, whether it's art or a science or physics. Imagine it as a mental fortress in your head. Your job is to build up that fortress, make it as strong as possible, create a moat around it, put soldiers on guard, whatever. And then the next thing is to attack it as much as you can. Your fortress might crumble or it might get worn down at first, but the point is to rebuild it over and over again. Just keep making it stronger. But what does attacking your fortress actually mean? Well, the first step is to choose a medium. Personally, my favorite medium is YouTube, just because I think that it allows you to learn a lot of other skills, and also long form content lets you go a bit deeper into concepts in other forms, but it can really be any medium. The point is to choose a medium. It can be public speeches, writing essays, short form content, long form content, whatever. Make sure that it happens at least once a week, but if you can get feedback every day, that's even better. And then all you have to do is start teaching people through the medium that you chose. That's literally it. You don't have to overcomplicate it. You don't have to make it way harder than it needs to be. Choose a medium and start teaching people what you know, and then start filling in the gaps. After you start publishing your projects, you begin to build relationships and people will start pointing out your gaps. And the faster that you can get this feedback loop going, then the faster that you're going to be able to find more gaps and begin to understand your concepts greater. And that's the whole point, right? If you can do this long term and actually apply this habit that every single genius in history has used, then I guarantee you that you will move so far ahead from everyone else that when you look back, you won't even see them. And let's face it, you're probably not even going to look back, because why would you? You're too far ahead. And I mean, who even knows? You could be the next Einstein, you could be the next Feynman, you could be the next Niels Bohr. Don't limit yourself in any way, not even through the pain. And especially when people start pointing out the gaps in your arguments, you're going to feel a lot of pain. And that's okay. The point is to feel that pain and push through it. So anyway, with that said, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope this video helped in some way. I hope people use it and actually do become geniuses. By the way, I have a product. I give daily doses of historical wisdom every single day in podcast form. So if you'd like access to that, you can check out the link in the description. And if you like this video, then you might want to check out this video, which is Charlie Munger's mental models. They'll help you think way better and problem solve way better. So I think if you like this one, you'll like that one. Anyway, see ya.